Hey everyone, welcome back to the Integrating Investor. Thanks for joining me again today. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming if you're new. As always, I'm Seth Levine of the Integrating Investor website. You can find all my fun stuff up there. But I'm pretty excited for a couple reasons today. First and foremost, I have a green screen, so you may notice it's a little less worse than it normally is. That's pretty cool, right? There will be some spots, but hopefully that clears up some of the distraction. Also, I will be distracted though, because I am cooking a brisket today. Maybe not the smartest thing to do. This is my wireless thermometer. So I got that going outside. So if I seem a little bit distracted, it's because I'm at a critical part of the cook. Did not time this well. You live and you learn. But hopefully we live and we learn, and I'll be eating something pretty good today. So today we will pick off, I guess, where we pick up where we left off last week, where we were talking about crypto and DeFi, right? Crypto and DeFi. Very fun topics to discuss. Now, of course, I'm going to use the words Bitcoin and cryptocurrency synonymously here. I know they are different, but let's just roll with it. Go with me here. And of course, if you missed last week's show, I highly recommend checking it out as that kind of sets some of the context for this week's show. And again, I'm actually going to be kind of expanding upon an article I wrote on my site, theintegratinginvestor.com. That talks about all this. We have that linked in the show description for you. Now, of course, please do me a favor. It's a huge help would just be to like and share the show, any episode, if you do indeed like it. This is your day. This is your periodic reminder. Just why don't you just hit that like button right now and kind of see how the show goes. And if you don't like it, just, unlike it later, or thumbs down it if it's really terrible. But if you like it now, at least you don't have to remember it later. So that'd be a huge help. You could also follow me on Twitter. Got my handle up there. Got the website up there as well. I highly recommend that you go there and subscribe to my email list. I write once a month. It's not a lot, but this way you'll at least get the articles when they come out. And of course, I'm on Instagram, but I don't really do much there except for maybe check out like jujitsu videos or anything like that. So if you're into jujitsu, maybe hit me up there. And also, we're four so shows in. I would just really love to know what everyone thinks of the show so far. I'm kind of winging this. I think it's kind of different. It's kind of a mix of philosophy and investing and really just getting into the nuts and bolts here. So not a lot of people do that, at least to my knowledge. So, hoping that it's interesting to someone else besides me. And of course, if you have any topics for shows that you'd like me to cover, reach out again. It'd be great. Just let me know how it's all going. And again, that's on integratinginvestor.com for you. There's a contact page there. You could hit me on Twitter. You could find me. Or just comment in the show here, right? Because I'll check that. Also, I'm pretty excited because I have some really cool guests coming up. My kind of thinking right now is to maybe do one interview a month. I don't want to overwhelm it because that's there are a lot of interview shows out there, and I really want to keep the show here focused on that is ought mentality that we're trying to keep here. So anyway, again, please use the use the super chat function there, right? That's what it's here for. Again, all the proceeds go to the Ayn Rand Center. None of it goes to me. So please help support them. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. I'm going to try and do a much better job with that. I'm definitely going to see your super chat questions or comments there. So if you use that, I will definitely see that. So again, MA, welcome back. Put my picture of brisket on Instagram. I may put it on Instagram. It's definitely on Twitter. That's sort of where I hang out the most on social media, mostly on Twitter. Instagram, just a little less so. It's harder for what I do. There's less kind of investment discussions taking place on there. So check me out on Twitter. I'll try to get one up on Instagram as well for you, MA. Especially, thank you so much for the super chat donation there, and for that, I will definitely put it on there. So, moving right along to what we do here, right? Again, what do I have to do? I don't even know if I have to do this, but we're going to start with the old disclaimer slide here. Again, these are my personal opinions. They are not investment advice. Do your own work. I'm not pitching anything here. I actually am long some Bitcoin and Ethereum, so keep that in mind if you think that's going to cloud my thinking. But I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, so yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. And since we're on Bitcoin and we're on crypto, I mean, why not start with a meme, right? Like, crypto's all about memes. So as a reminder, we're talking about crypto and DeFi today, right? And what is DeFi? DeFi stands for decentralized finance, right? Decentralized finance, right? And big push behind crypto. And if you go back to the earliest white paper of Bitcoin being Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper on Bitcoin, he talks about it in a decentralized finance function, right? And so crypto is a big part of DeFi. DeFi is at least in general, my view, I think it's a very desirable goal to decentralize the financial system. However, that said, I really see crypto as a distraction for the goal of DeFi, right? And we started to get into this a little bit last week. So if we move right along onto the next meme, of course, this is a very familiar sort of, this meme right here, just it encapsulates all that is the crypto movement, right? So many people see crypto as a silver bullet to fix the financial system, right? Financial system's in trouble. Bitcoin fixes that, of course, right? We just need Bitcoin to fix this massive financial system, right? And it's not just the financial system. People see it as a fix for everything. However, not me, right? I don't know if I stand alone on this one or not, but I just see the issues as completely reversed. And why do I see it reverse? Well, this high level of the passion in crypto, right? The emotion, and above all, the mudslinging that's in that space, in the discussion spaces, and of course the memes, right? I mean, just the all the memes that go around crypto and the crypto space. I mean, it indicates to me just very sloppy thinking on the topic, because it's so emotional. These are just really big topics, and that's why we're here, right? We're going to try and untangle it all, right? And we're not just doing this for fun, right? Like, like, oh yeah, you talk about Bitcoin. No, we're here to try and make money, right? We're here to make money. We're trying better come up with a clear investment thesis for crypto. Should we invest in crypto or not? What is crypto? Thus, how we ought to handle it from an investment perspective, right? Investment is, after all, the act of selection. So let's go right back here. So I'm back. So so where did we leave off? And before, Jonathan, thank you so much for your donation. Big support of the show. Really appreciate it. Thanks a ton. Hope you're enjoying it. So where do we leave off, right? We were talking about centralization and decentralization, right? Now, a lot of people are familiar with decentralization, centralization, but I don't think people are as clear as maybe we should be on this, right? Because I don't see centralization as a matter of market share, right? Google, dominates search, right? The search industry is, some may say, concentrated, right? It's definitely concentrated, but is it centralized? And to me, the answer is no, right? Because there's still the possibility to compete in search, right? Anyone could come up with a better search engine, and Google would have to go out and defend its market share. And that raises the issue of political power versus economic power. And I'm not going to go back into that, but I highly recommend going back into last week's show where we talked about that. If you have questions, of course, on it and you need a refresher, use that chat function, use the super chat function, and I'll definitely see it. But if you use the chat function too, I will come back to it. Now, we know that the financial system is archaic, right? It's fragile. It's concentrated. It's also like centralized. And it's centralized. It's also really highly regulated, right? Well, that's no surprise, right? The centralization and the regulation come hand in hand. So because it's so centralized, I mean, to me, I mean, the obvious cure is decentralization, right? If centralization bad, well, then decentralization must be good. So moving right along, right? So this is kind of how I see things, right? DeFi, that's what we want. Crypto, yeah. Distraction from deregulation, the actual component that will decentralize the financial system, right? This is not a matter of technology. It is a matter of politics. So we were talking last week about free banking, right? What do I mean by deregulations? Well, specifically, let's talk about free banking, right? I know free banking. Oh, right. Holy smokes, free bank. You can't let bankers be free. What are you, crazy? Those crooks, those crazy. I mean, bankers, you want bankers to be free and unregulated and do whatever they want? I mean, surely there could be no bigger disaster, right, than bankers running free from regulation, just destroying the economy, just taking money out of hand in everyone's pocket, just destroying it, right? I mean, this is just absurd, honestly. And now I know it's very popular, but I think that's just because people aren't so good on their history, right? If you look back in history, there actually were periods of free banking, and they existed to various extents through various times, right? Probably the most notable one, notable to me maybe, is Scotland in the early 1700s to the mid kind of 1800s. We had free banking in the US, actually, where I am. And that was really in the antebellum period here, which is really the first half of the 18th century. It existed in Canada up until 1935, right? We don't think about Canada having a lot of banking crises. And you know what? It's because it had been pretty deregulated and free up until 1935. It's also been in Australia, in Sweden, Switzerland, Chile, Colombia, France, Ireland. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? Like what is like free bank? Like what is free banking, right? Like what do I mean by free banking, right? Well, it's very specific what I mean, right? Now, there has never been laissez-faire banking, right? But there have been periods where it was more free. And really a more apt name would be more free banking, right? These were periods where banks were very lightly regulated, at least compared to today. And in a couple really important ways. So first thing is they were able to issue competitive private banknotes that actually acted as currency, right? Gold was the monetary standard. Now, this doesn't mean you need a gold standard, but this is just a historical fact. Gold was the monetary standard, and banks were able to issue their own private banknotes that acted as currency, and people would go out and they'd use that literally as money for goods and services. And there were also a whole host of that was one way, and they didn't have all these capital regulations and these mandatory holdings and just all sorts of stuff. But they did fail, and it's very important because when they did fail, it oftentimes came back to regulations, right? So one of the big ones in the U.S. is just an area that I'm more familiar with is the U.S. is unitary banking. What is unitary banking? Well, unitary banking is a law that literally prohibited banks in the U.S. from branching. What is a branch, right? You can only have one bank branch, right? One bank location. And you need charters and all these other items that kind of limited competition. So if you're one bank, imagine you're a bank and you're the Bank of Nebraska, right? Well, what do you think the Bank of Nebraska? Who do you think what do you think the Bank of Nebraska lend to, right? Farmers in Nebraska, obviously, right? This is pre-internet. Like you were lending to the local economy. So what happened was you have a drought come by, destroy, there's crop failure in 1 year, and that bank goes out of business. Why? Well, because all of its risks are concentrated, right? It was all completely levered to the local economy. It wasn't able to diversify. Maybe you would have a branch in Nebraska and a branch in New York and a branch in San Francisco and a branch in Texas, such that it was able to diversify its risks. You also had mandatory bond banking, right? The US government told banks that it had to back its reserves with US government bonds. Well, that doesn't sound so unreasonable, right? We kind of have that today, but you have to think back to the time period. This was pre-Civil War. These were times when governments didn't run up massive deficits. In fact, what would happen is typically there'd be a war. The government would issue bonds. Banks would use them as capital and lend against them. And then the government would go and repay the bonds. So they call the bonds, and then the banks had nothing, no capital base to lend against. So it was so even though banks were free, right? They were very they weren't totally free, right? They were more free. And to the extent that they were free, they worked, right? And this is because market forces actually regulated banks. I know market forces, right? Market forces there's no better regulator than the market, in my view. And if you think about this, because the market forces were the regulator, it made banks conservative, right? Think about the old image of the conservative, boring, stodgy banker, right? There weren't these high flying, they were hotshot deal makers, right? There were these boring images, right? And think about some even the bank names themselves, just like, right, big yawn, boring, right? Like you have, for example, the Washington Trust Company, the Institutions for Savings, right? The Wilmington Savings Fund Society, Northern Trust, right? The Savings Bank, right? These are not names that really, they're very boring and conservative names. So we had all these different time periods in the US where banks were lightly regulated and kind of more or less did their own thing, right? Now, these must have been disasters, right? I mean, they had to have been, right? I mean, look at just look at today. We don't do this anymore, right? There must have been huge disasters, right? Well, let's look at it, right? So this is one study right here on your screen. It's a compilation of major recessions, bank panics, and bank failures, right? And this was done by Jeffrey Rogers Hummel at altm.org, right? And I love that website. I highly recommend looking at altm.org for the historical stuff. That's what I like. I'm not really so into their more modern stuff and thinking, but definitely the historical bank stuff there is fantastic. So anyway, we had this study, right? And what Mr. Hummel found was that central bankers actually, the era of central banking actually turned out to be no safer than the period of kind of free banking, right? And that should be a surprise, right? Because you think, well, we had central banks because it was so dangerous to have them unregulated. Well, actually, what Mr. Hummel finds is that, quote, the widespread belief among economists, historians, and journalists that the Federal Reserve, which was created in 1914, was an essential major improvement appears to be no more than unreflective faith in government economic management with little foundation in historical evidence. Right? It was no better. Central banks today are no better than their track record today is no better than what it was in the period before central banks. And this is particularly embarrassing because we have a lot more tools and knowledge today than what they had in the early 1800s, right? Like banking wasn't around that long, right? They didn't have electricity and computers. Now we have all these tools. We have another, 100, 150 years of of knowledge and data to go on, and we're no better. That seems pretty weak to me. So, so looking at one study, so a few of my favorite economists on this topic are Larry White, George Selgin, and Kevin Dowd, and they can all be found at Altam. Now, Larry White, is probably one of the foremost experts on this period, and I'm going to quote you something from him on this period in his analysis, right? And I actually think in the description there's probably a paper by him there, right? He says, quote, most, if not all, right, and he means all, talking about periods of free banking. Most, if not all, periods of free banking can be considered as reasonably successful, and sometimes quite remarkably so. In particular, were not prone to inflation. They did not show signs of natural monopoly, and they boosted economic growth by delivering efficiency and payment practices in those intermediate and right. So there you go, right? Those systems of plural note issue, right, which is really what we're talking about, that were prone to failure, like those of the pre-1913 United States and pre-1832 England, were not so because of competition, but because of legal restrictions that significantly weakened banks, right? So I bungled that whole quote, but basically what Larry White is saying is that banking did not fail on its own, but it failed because of legal restrictions that weakened the banks, right? So where banks were given like reasonably a free trial, for example, in Scotland and Canada, they functioned pretty well for the typical user of money and banking services. And in fact, George Selgin, one of a great economist here, he has found through a number of papers I've read on his that actually, when you look at when actually periods of when banks actually failed, which was low to begin with, but depositors very rarely lost money, right? They lost some, and sometimes it took a lot of time to actually retrieve their funds, but they very rarely lost money. If free banking was so great, then why is it gone? Why don't we have free banking today? Well, it's not going to surprise you that free banking often ended because of the imposition of heavy regulations and the creation of a privileged central bank, right? And that offered revenue advantages to politically influential interests, right? No surprise, right? And you guys in the UK, Bank of England is a great example of this. The Bank of France is a great example of this, where for political reasons, a privileged bank was created in order to help the government fund itself in a lot of ways. And that allowed that monopoly power was granted to it by the state, right? Political power. It wasn't economic power, it was political power. To quote Larry White again, central banks primarily arose directly or indirectly from legislation that created privileges to promote the fiscal interests of the state or the rent-seeking interests of privileged bankers, not from market forces. So there you have it, right? Now, why don't we really know about free banking? Why is it so obscure? Well, just like anything else, right? He who wins the war writes history. And right now, central banking has won the war in finance, and hence they are writing history. And the history right now is that deregulated banking is very dangerous, and central banking keeps us all safe, right? So there you have it, right? It was sorry. Yep. So it was right. So there you have it, right? It was regulations that killed DeFi. It wasn't DeFi itself imploding on itself, as a lot of people would like to admit. Now, we had DeFi, right? We had free banking. We had DeFi. It was working pretty good, actually, by a lot of historical accounts. It wasn't perfect, right? No system is perfect, but it was pretty good, and it compares favorably to central banking. In fact, we had DeFi before we had electricity. We had it without computers. We had it without the internet, right? So this brings me back to crypto. And again, why we'll go back to our meme here, right? Why I see things as DeFi, why crypto is just, it's just a distraction to me, right? Because DeFi didn't require technology, right? It didn't, not back, a couple hundred years ago. It didn't require electricity, right? It didn't need computers. It didn't need math. It didn't need cryptology, right? It didn't even need decentralized entities, right? Which is a big part of the crypto movement. They talk about decentralized companies and decentralized applications. Like this is the killer app, right? No pun intended. No, it didn't require any of that. All it required was a kind of political economic environment, right? It was the environment. It was the politics. What did it require? DeFi requires freedom. End of discussion, right? DeFi requires freedom. So let me just check the chat here. That's a lot right there. So I'm glad you guys are having a good discussion here. It looks like you guys know what's going on. Any questions? It's going to be hard for me to catch up. Please, use it right now, and maybe I'll see it. Use that super chat function, and hopefully I'll try and see it. So now, thankfully, right today, thankfully, regulations, right? We have a lot of regulations today. It's pretty centralized today. However, banking really isn't fully centralized, right? Rather, all that innovation, it just moved into the shadows. And now, luckily for us, that cat and mouse game between innovator and regulator, it's still continuing to this day. So while crypto can aid in this, it can aid, that sort of, it can help evade the regulations, right? It can help that cat, it can help the mouse kind of evade the cat. It really can't change the game, right? The game is political. So really, this is kind of how I see everything, right? DeFi, the shadow banks are like, hey, DeFi fans, what are you looking at crypto? We've got this giant industry going on, billions of dollars of industry operating to free finance. How about a little love here, right? How about a little help? And everyone's like, no, let's just do crypto, right? Like crypto is the end all be all, right? So I'll end it here. This was a pretty dense show again, but hopefully it's enjoyable. Hopefully we're kind of, scratching the surface on some new topics here. We're pulling together a lot of different data from different places and just trying to show why crypto is not a silver bullet for DeFi, as much as I'd love it to be. I mean, I would love it if it was that simple, right? So again, like, we're not doing this for fun, right? I mean, it is fun, but it's not our main purpose, right? Diving deep into these kind of topics and in this kind of epistemological manner, right? It allows us to start picking apart and evaluating these very complex and emotional investment theses. And the idea here is really just to make money, right? So with that, I'm going to leave it here. Just so you know, the brisket is coming along really well. I'll try and get some pictures up. It'll definitely be on Twitter. So follow me on Twitter at Seth Levine 2. Super creative, I know. The temperature, we were doing well. I thought I was going to be done by the end of the show, but I may have another couple hours left. So it's going to be kind of a stretch to it, but I hope that means it just comes out good. So follow me there. I'll try and get one up on Instagram for you, MA, because thanks a lot for the super chat. And I'm going to pick up this topic again next week. So now we defined centralization, decentralization last week. Here we talked a little bit about free banking and how we don't need it, how we don't need crypto per se. It's not a matter of technology. It's a matter of politics. And hopefully next week we'll kind of talk about what that landscape looks like today. And, who knows where we'll go. So thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, everyone. Have a good night in the UK, in the US. Still it's beautiful outside here in New York. Hope you're all having fun, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again. And hit that like button, share it. Thanks.